welcome everybody. Good morning. Well, it's morning for me. I'm in the West Coast. It's 9 a.m. I've got Ben Toth in Hungary. I believe it's 6 p.m. in Hungary. And Ian Kummer is live from Moscow suburbs. I think it's also 6 p.m. there. Is that true, Ian?
It's 8 p.m. here.
It should be
Yeah,
later.
A couple hours ahead.
That'll be the first lie of many on this episode. That's not true. So the title of our program today is Rules-Based Order Fades. So, it's kind of like our broader title of our podcast here is, exposing Imperial Decline. And we see more and more signs of that everywhere. But, this rules-based order, do we want to talk about what the rules-based order is versus what the actual international law is, because these are two completely different things?
Well, the first we can talk about, because nobody knows. Nobody tells anybody what the rules are. It's telling, what America wants, that's what you do. These rules apply to you. And if America wants to do something that goes against the rules, they are free to do so. But other nations, not so much. Then they become terrorists.
And I think that's the conventional wisdom that's becoming more and more, apparent to people. I think probably most people watching this will have that basic understanding that, there's international law, which is entirely different from the rules-based order. And the way the U.S. has created this rules-based order is, it's just hypocrisy. And, the laws are whatever they say they are, whenever they say they are, and they're free to contradict or be hypocritical, whenever it benefits their interests. I mean, and that's the basic difference. But that's fading.
Yeah, it's stretched ultra thin, isn't it, Billy Bob? Hey, Carlos here, the silent Zeus.
Sorry to scare the audience with that image. I should have said something before I just allowed that to pop up. But
fresh from the doctors.
We're so good to see you, Carlo. I was going to tell everybody you were on assignment in Gaza, but obviously you've come back earlier than expected.
I got tossed out. Yep.
Carlo, explain to everybody the difference between the rules-based order and international law.
Okay. That's way above my pay grade.
No, it's not. So, but yeah, so we're just talking about the title of the program, the rules-based order fades, and what the rules-based order is, and how it's it's a hypocritical do as I say, not as I do. Might makes right kind of ethos.
Maybe I can lay out some branches, and then we can pick up on each of them one by one, or whatever you guys want, because this is freeform. I anticipated a lot more news this weekend, because we had the second big Nasrallah speech, which I watched. We had the Islamic cooperation meeting in Riyadh, where I expected a lot more. Nothing much really happened. People think they're nothing burgers. I don't agree. But yeah, I was anticipating more news. But obviously the first front, which was country 404, Ukraine, it looks like Kabul. It's absolutely everybody's pulling out except for idiots like, Olaf Scholz, who's doubling the aid, even though his own defense minister, Pistorius, said that the ammo requirements are just unrealistic in this German economy. He's the one who's volunteering to pick up the tab that the US, I think that guy, Sullivan, said the window for funding Ukraine is closing. But that's just dropped. The second front is obviously the Israel-Gaza front, where, they're trapped. They're trying to get out of the trap in Ukraine, but it looks like the US, its massive fleets and its international reputation, as well as, alliances, are trapped in a quagmire. And there's a lot of coping coming out of there. And the third front is a would-be front, trying to create another Ukraine in the Pacific. And there are some volunteers. India, incredibly, is going along with the US way, according to Badra Kumar, who was an excellent diplomat from India. Philippines is the one at the forefront of volunteering for this clusterfuck. And in the background of this, what the cheat sheet I made is mostly about is economics. It's Bloomberg, Financial Times, these sort of places, which are all ringing the bells, you know, about the debt, the economy, the shit we have in Europe, in Israel, in Japan, in the US economy. So that's the broad, I think, multifaceted of being spread way too thin. That's what the empire currently is facing with multiple branches. I don't know, where do you want to start or jump in?
I'm going to be quiet until somebody else says something.
Well, so it's interesting what we were said before we signed on here. We were talking about Israel and just the incredible developments we had, because, you know, October 7th happened, 7th of October, the Hamas attack happened, the flood, the astonishingly weak defense against it, and that whole front just collapsing. All of that high-tech border control and automated machine gun turrets and surveillance and everything just collapsed. And then after that, now if we compare it to the Belgorod incursion that happened last year,
Yes,
where Ukrainians, those Russian freedom fighters, went to liberate Russia.
on Twitter, there was a 24-hour trend of hashtag Bilhorod People's Republic done by NATO, and in 24 hours it disappeared.
It was gone. So it took about 6 to 8 hours to clean that mess up.
Yeah,
6 to 8 hours. The FSB and the border guards and everybody else had that mess cleaned up and kicked them out. But now, if you look at it, took about 3 days, and maybe over 3 days. There were still pockets of Hamas fighters in Israeli territory, even 4 or 5 days later. And then after that, I was if I would actually say this with a high degree of certainty, if Israel had just steamrolled Gaza that week, in a week, had steamrolled Gaza, wiped out Hamas, the international community wouldn't do anything about it, because everybody was still trying to process what had happened. If you just act fast, you can get away with almost anything, because it would have just been over already. But the thing is, they didn't. They sat there. They did the airstrikes. They waited for the carrier groups. Okay, we need a second carrier group. Please send another carrier group. Please send Marines. Please send ammo. And then a month went by, and then switched. Then we're 6 weeks. We're at 5 weeks now, I guess, going on 6 weeks, and still not much in the way of progress. And so public opinion's turning against them. And part of the reason why is because they're taking so long. It's just like peeling a Band-Aid off, and they're taking so long with it. And as far as I can tell, they're focused so heavily on air power because they're just extremely risk adverse down to an individual level. You send Israeli troops to clear out a neighborhood, they can't do it. They just don't want to get shot at. And, if you have an army that can't fight, it doesn't matter what technological advantage you have.
I completely agree. If you're talking about on the ground fighting, they're just not, the TikTok army is not used to this. But if you look at ordnance drops, like in TNT, I think we're at 1.5 Hiroshimas and around or beyond 11,000 civilians killed. We're about 4,500 kids. So that still happened. That's, to me, is still a genocide, whatever people say. But according to international law and the convention that talked about this, is still a genocide. But they didn't want to go in and do basically Bakhmut, because that's not something Israel is capable of. You're right there. And it took such a long time. Just one more aspect, because it always comes back to economics. Apparently, the Times of Israel came out that this is costing 260 million a day. The war thing, which is like 1 billion for every 4 days. Like that's a serious drain on the economy, from which somebody help me. It's beyond 300,000, but a lot of reservists need to be pulled in to full mobilization.
Yeah.
Who were at jobs,
I posted this within the first week, on my blog. I posted this within the first week that this started. It's that the problem with reservists, the same thing with American reservists, because I was an American reservist for a long time, about 10 years. So when you have a National Guard unit or any other reserve unit, it takes about a year of, practicing on weekends. So like you meet once a month, you do that for 12 months. You have 2 weeks in the summer. about 12 months of very intense, part-time training. And then you need several months of intense full-time training before you're even thinking of going to a combat zone like Iraq or Afghanistan. So with these Israeli reservists, all the training they have is whatever they got up to this point. And from what we've seen so far, it's not that much. And it's too late to train them. They can't pause for 3 months and train them. I don't think their economy can even handle that. Once the war starts, it's too late to train. You need to train before the war starts. So it's not looking good for them.
Well, I want to give a shout out to Shaniqua. We're glad to have you back, Shaniqua.
Yes.
I'm glad you've been detoxed of all of this garbage that's been going on in the world. But I watched a little bit of the mainstream media on this, and they seem to be focusing around this one hospital and the way the Israelis are handling the siege of this hospital. It's even been defined by Seymour Hersh as an Alamo situation for Hamas. And
a children's hospital.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the name escapes me right now. But there's a whole different sense given through the mainstream media that they have basically the Israelis have basically cut off northern Gaza from southern Gaza, and they've got it surrounded, and they're closing in. Is there any? And I haven't heard anything about Hamas being effective against the Israelis necessarily. I mean, the Israelis are numbering their dead at 44. Last I heard, I'm sure it's gone up somewhat, but that's not a huge number. What do you guys
it's
hear on that?
Unrealistically low, but go ahead, Billy Bob.
I mean, it's the fog of war, and we're not going to be able to know what's going on. And I mean, as much as I would like to think that the TikTok army of Israel, is ineffective and not able to, mount any kind of, military operation in Gaza, I have no certainty that that's true. So, we can't know. It's the fog of war. The mainstream media is not going to tell us the truth. Maybe it is true that it was just 44 Israelis. So for me, I'm just like, we're going to have to wait and see.
I've seen at least 50 different videos of the Merkava tank being blown up. Now, let's say all 50 of the tank, I don't know how big the crew is, 2 or 3. They all survived. I shudder to say there's a lot more casualties than are being admitted without even being there, just based on the footage that gets.
Yeah. So there's definitely, on social media, you have access to, PR from Hamas and from the Palestinian side. And I've seen things like that too. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, how can we have any certainty? But
of course we can.
For the best.
But the latest, as you were talking about the hospitals, I checked, it's the Rantisi Children's Hospitals, which they surrounded and took, and they sent in this guy who sounds like Borat to do a PR video, and he showed, look, basically it was a friend of mine who's I sent it to a Sparky. What's a Sparky? An electrician friend of mine saying, what's this? And it's a fuse box attached to a hole in the ground in which there's a rail, and obviously it's the top of an elevator shaft.
Yes.
But they said that's the tunnel that leads down. Then they showed basically a calendar with Arabic things on it, and immediately if you put it through like a basic translator, it's a basic roster. There's no names on it. It's the roster of the week, of the work shifts. And this is, look at these, which is the terrorists. They are all marked for dead. It was the lowest quality shit I've ever seen. I thought Israel was fantastic at PR, and they look weak as hell. Like most people absolutely seeing through this. And the second thing I saw was just the embodiment of this moment where we are. It looked like one of those Times Square. It wasn't on Times Square, one of those big digital signage things, right? And it was I stand with Ukraine, and there was another sign like smashing it down, and it was I stand with Israel, and the flag transition, like literally that's what happened in the animation. Draw your conclusions, ladies.
But Israel is going to make good their threats to take out Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Yes, they'll be taken out.
All those names are going to be eliminated by the end of the week.
What I'm sure of is that, I don't know if you've seen this, it was on Israeli TV, that under the Al Shifa hospital, which is it's like a medical complex, that's where these miles and kilometers of underground tunnels and structures and administrative stuff is. And they had this 3D render, and it reminded me exactly of Donald Rumsfeld, when Bin Laden was hiding in the Hindu Kush, in the mountains of Tora Bora. And he had this sliced image of the mountain with lots of little things in it. And he said, it's not one, there's many of these. And I don't remember seeing a single tour of these facilities because he wasn't there in the first place. But yeah, I doubt we're going to see these as well.
He also had images of the mobile, what was it? Mobile that would like make uranium on a, in Iraq, big mobile semis that were producing, weapons grade uranium, and that's why the weapons.
They had centrifuges. They were refining it. Yeah.
Right.
It's the stuff they'll come up with, but definitely Israel's losing the PR war. I mean, I'm seeing, when I read the headlines in the mainstream news, so MSN.com, it's like power cut to, Palestinian hospital, 41 children die due to power being cut. Everybody in the ICU is dead due to the power being cut to this hospital. So it's kind of unprecedented, the bad PR that Israel is getting, and I find it interesting. But what does it mean? So what? They're getting bad PR. What's how's that going to change anything?
Politically, that's untenable long term. I mean, people say the Islamic Cooperation Summit, ICS, right? That was nothing. But I saw, what do you call it? The Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, heading in basically to shake hands and very, very warmly be welcomed by Erdogan. They were enemies not long ago. And then Ibrahim Raisi, the president of Iran, do the same with MBS. Even though they struck the most serious parts of their joint statement, which would have been embargo, war crimes, don't trade anything, resend all the ambassadors, that was stricken. It was a very unified Arab response in the world of diplomacy. And even at home, Joe Biden has now been sued. A lawsuit has been filed by, multiple human rights entities, but this one I think is serious, and it's called the Center for Constitutional Rights. They sued Biden, Blinken, and Austin, basically for failing to prevent a genocide. This was reported by The Guardian. So there's huge backlash. It's not just the level of the population, it's getting up to the legal part of this.
Well, yeah, but we had Christopher Black on the show. He could probably, give us the
ICC is never going to prosecute.
Yeah, they're not going to.
Netanyahu, never.
And the question is, when is not Netanyahu going to go? And my sense is he's not. And
why not?
And I can use as a role model for this is Donald Trump. I mean, the more you indict the guy, the more you slander him in the press, the more power he gains. And I'm ready to apologize to that. Can't remember the commentator's name, but who suggested that African American people were getting behind Trump because they felt he was being persecuted in a sense the way they're persecuted. And sure enough, so the latest polls have Trump garnishing 22% of the African American of potential vote, which is enormous compared to anyone else, anyone else of his ilk in U.S. politics. And I think that there's a connection. You can make a connection too with Netanyahu, and not only Netanyahu, but all the far right people he has in his cabinet and on his side, that they're really not going to go anywhere. I don't think popular opinion carries that much sway when it comes to getting some of these people out of power, out of these entrenched positions, especially given the fighting going on in
That's a
Gaza.
great point,
You
Shanika.
know, I
So
No, you're right. On October 6th, he was in deep crisis, maybe facing corruption, jail time, and on October 7th, that pretty much changed. I mean, I still hope that if there's a ceasefire that has the chance of being prolonged and actually, become a peace. Sorry if I'm naive in that. Then I think he's still gone. But right now, in the emergency situation, you might be right. He's glued in. And what Shanika said, that is the epitome. I mean, if you really want to do war crimes, bring in the professionals I think it was, I can't remember the phrasing, but for legitimacy purposes, bring in Tony Blair, the OG war criminal. That was amazing.
Well,
so I think Netanyahu's fortunes will be directly decided by how this turns out. If they're able to be successful and maybe ethnically cleanse Gaza, and forever make sure it's not a problem for them, it could be great for him. If they're not able to, it might not go so well. But I think he's ultimately whatever results for him will be determined on how this whole thing plays out. Ian, were you going to say something before I interrupted you?
Well, yes. I mean, I would say, how many of people who would have, and just in the public, who would have opposed Netanyahu would have just left, gone back to Poland, to Russia, wherever their families came from. I mean, a lot of people have left, and they have been cracking down. They've cracked down on the media. They've cracked down on foreign media. They've cracked down on dissent. Even just tweeting that you're sad for Palestinian civilians killed will get you arrested, under an hour. They're pretty fast, apparently.
They show up to your house. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. On the other hand, you're the military man, so Ian, I want to ask you this, because two people had the option of escalating. One was Netanyahu in his little war cabinet of 5 people, where people called "Let's strike Hezbollah," basically Beirut, and they've been on social media absolutely threatening Beirut, like, "Look how nice it is. I wonder what it will look like after the bombing." Explicitly, this is from IDF and those kinds of people, and he was the one who opted not to escalate, because Hezbollah has been doing pinpricks, basically locking down a bit of the attacking potential of the IDF there, but they haven't gone on all-out war. That's Nasrallah's speech. The second one was Joe Biden in response to the attacks in I think Syria, but by the Iraqi resistance, and I think 6 people were reportedly dead, which was an American serviceman, and he also had the option of a much bigger response that he said he wants to avoid escalation and doesn't want to do. Those were two, I wouldn't call them steps back, but
well, they could definitely be signs that the rules-based order is fading, and that the empire is in decline when you can kill 4 or 6 U.S. servicemen on a military base, and the president says, "You know what? We'll just take it." I mean,
well, have we confirmed the deaths yet? I mean, I saw that speculation yesterday from Middle Eastern media speculating on that. Has the DOD, anybody actually confirmed the deaths with the death notification, anything like that?
Immediately after reading it on the internet, I just knew it was true. So I didn't bother anymore.
Because it is actually hard. It's tough.
You're right. It's from Al Mayadeen, so it's not exactly.
Yeah, so I would take that with a grain of salt, because typically in the Middle East, they're fairly fast, like within 48 hours of reporting deaths. I've not heard of them going the route of actually straight up covering it up yet. And also you have to think of the small number of troops that we have in these countries. They're not those huge where I think, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, in Syria we had about 2,000 tops. It's harder to cover up deaths than that. So I would take those reports with a grain of salt unless there's something more concrete about that. And also, to answer your question, Ben, I think we're looking at these are provocations too. When you're as you said, pinpricking the enemy, because when you're looking at kind of a light asymmetric force like Hezbollah, or the Iraqi groups, I think with even the Iraqi groups, it's, they've got this PR umbrella term of the Iraqi resistance, but, that's in actuality, you're looking at a bunch of different groups that don't necessarily play well together or cooperate well if it came to.
Or even communicate. Yeah.
Or even communicate, right. So their
Iran
best
directly controls all of them.
Well,
that's
don't know
the
that.
official.
We don't know.
They're all
that.
proxies.
That was.
Actually, controlling people is harder than it seems in video games. But the point is, if Israel, let's say, moved towards Beirut, went into Lebanon, that would make things easier for Hezbollah militarily, because when you fight from a defensive position, that makes these kind of militia type units more effective. But if they actually, I don't think they have a lot of capability to actually aggressively attack Israel. And there would be serious consequences to it too, because of course Israel bombed the hell out of them. It's easier to do a provocation to get Israel to do something foolish and try to do an incursion into Lebanon. So that's what I would call these provocations.
If you take Nasrallah at his word, and I think he's a really good politician, not a military commander, he said it's basically locking up some of the capacity, the attacking capacity of the IDF is all we're doing. But I have seen pictures, videos from Israeli sources of the shining city of Haifa, even Tel Aviv burning. So some of their missiles, these pinpricks, are getting through. Even if, and I don't think it's in the interest of Hezbollah or the nation, Beirut, the nation. Why am I blanking on the nation? Lebanon to actually escalate, to have the horrors visited upon them that are visited upon Gaza.
Exactly.
So I don't see that at all. They it's a very interesting situation, but as opposed to a powder keg, that's why I said I think it's a trap, because October 6th, again, it was all about Netanyahu and his plan for we're going to be the gas hub for Europe, right? And it's all going to be settled, which means Saudi Arabia. And, the original doctrine where they got the Saudis and the Gulf states to sort of semi-recognize Israel was basically you work together against the resistance forces led by Iran. And that was almost sort of working. Now, because of the 10/7 attack, at least on the international stage in diplomacy, they are a united front. I know they all have their own petty interest in the region, small nations, Saudis, all of that, their interest, but it's forced them into, I think, a position they didn't want to a month from now. So in that regard, I see it as a very, very good development. But that might just be me.
Now, no, I agree with that. Now, on the West, I've kind of been limited in what I can do lately. But one of the things is the fog machine coming out of the Western media, and Richard Medhurst did a really bang up job straightening that situation out. And oddly enough, what came up on my feed was John Oliver, who has a show on HBO. I don't know if you guys are aware of it. It's called, what is it called? This week.
Last week tonight. I know
That's
it.
right.
And it used to be garbage, but I saw this last segment. Go on.
Yeah, and I hated that show and stopped watching it when he did a hatchet job on Venezuela about 3 years ago. It came up my feed on Gaza, and I listened to it. And he made some of the same points that Richard Medhurst was making. For example, if you watch the mainstream media, you get this garbage about, well, if the people of Gaza are against Hamas or have anything against, why did they vote for them? Why did it? Well,
that's coming up.
First of all, that vote took place in 2006, and what Oliver did brilliantly was he had footage of one of the main mouthpieces of Hamas back in 2006, prior to the election, going, "We're a moderate group. We're not an armed group. We don't want to take up arms against Israel. We're moderates. We're for applying therefore some kind of solution." And then he showed a piece just from last week of the same guy, and it was like, Israel's got to be completely destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth, so on and so forth. It was a very powerful juxtaposition, as powerful as anything Medhurst did, which I thought was a brilliant job of straightening out some of the misconceptions around what's going on, and blowing away a lot of the fog surrounding this conflict. But I was surprised at how HBO, which is a huge organization which is dependent on all kinds of capital to keep going, allowed Oliver to have the show, which was, he played both sides, but it definitely was very sympathetic toward the Palestinian people.
I'm not quite sure I understand the juxtaposition of these two comments. So the Hamas spokesperson was denying any kind of militant, stance against Israel in 2006, and now he's saying, but how is that? I just don't understand how that's supportive of the Palestinians.
We have to take into account what Israel has done, in that.
Yeah, that's the flaw in it. Yeah, I mean, because
nobody really thinks. I mean, it's interesting that he would say that in 2006, but nobody really thinks that Hamas has never been a non-militant kind of an organization.
Well, but the point he was trying to make was people voted for Hamas because they felt Hamas would do more for the Palestinian people in Gaza than the what was it, the APL was, whoever the competing party was, and they won the election. Yeah, they won the election on those promises.
Yeah.
Now you can't argue Hamas never delivered on any of the what they could accomplish in Gaza. They were terrible domestically. If you want to take that space, they virtually ignored the rest of the Palestinian people. They were not good. They were not good stewards of taking care of the people on a daily basis. What they could do about garbage disposal, what they could do about improving the water supply, whatever they were allowed to do. Now, I'm not saying Israel wasn't standing in the way of a lot of that.
Thank you for that.
But still, still Hamas's record was dismal in that regard. So,
okay.
Well, I mean, and I have no way of evaluating, how Hamas functioned, or how their hands were tied behind their back or not tied behind their back. So it's just impossible for me to really have any kind of certainty and to judge them with any level of certainty. But you might be right. I mean, they might have done a terrible job. They might have been terrible stewards. I know that they won because Fatah, their opposition was seen as a proxy of the West. Like, they were sellouts. And that's why Hamas won in the West Bank and Hamas won in Gaza. And Hillary Clinton said, you know what, we shouldn't have allowed democracy until we were sure who was going to win that vote. So it just underscores the anti-democratic nature of the Western Empire.
They voted for the wrong guy, I think. Yes. Hillary said that. Yeah.
Certainly, Fatah shot themselves in the foot, given the amount of corruption they were involved in.
Well, I mean, once Arafat was assassinated, Mahmoud Abbas was just a sellout. I mean, they've all been sellouts.
Yeah, the Palestinian Authority, now they're called. They just call them the jailers. That's what the Palestinian.
Yeah, they're the capos of the whatchamacallit, the concentration camp, people that ran the concentration camp in Nazi Germany. That's what the Fatah is seen as. And so again, and Hamas was kind of the same way. I mean, they were in charge of running the concentration camp in Gaza, and it's hard for me to, blame them with any certainty for the dismal conditions in Gaza. Like, how much better could they really make that concentration camp? I'm not sure. Plus, you gotta resist. Like, you can't just totally exclude any kind of resistance. Like, you've got to do both things. You got to try and make people's lives better, but you also have to resist this being forced into a concentration camp. So I've got sympathy, or I don't know how much blame they deserve, but
I'm going to go further. Despite domestic policy, go on, Carlo.
No, I just wanted to say, look, all we hear about is Hamas having miles of tunnels under Gaza. That costs a huge amount of money. So they had a huge amount of money to work with. And frankly, from my point of view, my position as a standing back, I didn't see much of that used for their own people. I saw it used to arm themselves and to create this complex tunnel network.
Does digging tunnels cost money? Don't you just dig?
Millions of dollars.
How much money does it cost to dig? I mean, they've got a lot of people. They have a lot of young 16, 17, 18-year-old guys. Just say, here's a shovel, dig.
And
even years to do it.
Even the survivors, the ones that flee, if they are pointed at with a fucking boom mic saying, "Do you condemn Hamas?" they say no. And that's why I looked up the biographies of the 3 founding members. They were all in their teens when they were evicted from their villages, where everybody was basically shot next to the wall or just slaughtered in another way. I would have done the same. The thing is, they are an occupied nation. And everything they do under international law, including armed resistance, is legal. So when people, but do you condemn Hamas? No, I fucking don't. If Hamas deserves to be labeled terrorist or condemned, then the IDF or the IOF, as it's referred to in the Arab news, the Israeli occupying force, needs 30 times that much condemnation. So I'm not going for this little slice.
And I mean, I'm not gonna second guess Hamas and say, hey, you're split where you allocate a certain amount of your resources to resistance, and then you allocate a certain amount to improving quality of life. I'm not gonna judge them. Like, that's up for them. They're the ones that won the election. They get to make that determination. How much money they put towards resistance and how much money they put towards. And I don't know what those numbers are, but I'm not going to presume to judge them that I know better than them on how they should use their money. I mean, I can disagree with them, I guess.
Number one, the election took place in 2006, and they haven't allowed elections since then. Okay. Number two, we're not talking about Coochie here. We're not talking about little tunnels where a 5'4" guy like me was going to be sent down into if he was stupid enough to get drafted. Okay, we're talking about highly engineered tunnels where you can drive vehicles through that need serious excavation, and they're not like Coochie. They're not 6 feet underground or at maximum 20 feet underground. They're 60 feet underground, 75 feet underground. So that's a completely different ball game. You're not going to have a bunch of teenagers dig those out. I don't care how many years you have.
Point taken.
They don't have the engineering experience to do it without them caving in on.
Point taken, Carlo.
I'm not going to argue from our top Gazan correspondent. He just returned from on the ground. He's seen it with his own eyes. He knows what he's talking about.
What I was going to say is we all have electricity, internet, even heating. Probably Ian has the hottest heating because he's in Moscow. I cannot judge of people who have neither, and they were waiting for the rain to collect it just to fucking drink. So how about we switch over to the... No, go ahead.
Bob says... I'm not quite following exactly what he's saying, but I think he's talking about this split between allocating money for resistance versus allocating money for roads and infrastructure. But I'm not even sure who he's siding with. You were going to transition us, Ben?
I was going to switch gears to maybe the forgotten country 404 that seems to be dropped like a hot potato. And the big news we got over the weekend was this new guy who is responsible, or at least coordinated the effort to blow up the Nord Stream, if you believe a single fucking word of that. And he is like 2 steps removed from Valery Zaluzhny, the supreme commander of the armed forces of Ukraine, and he's already in jail, so that's very convenient. I don't know who. It's still the 6 guys on the yacht, right? It's the Gilligan's Island story.
So... If I could kind of maybe present this issue, and I will reference our friend of the show, Larry Johnson. So he's
Sonar 21.
Yeah, he's talking about how there's a kind of a divergence of strategies and opinions between the UK and how they think Ukraine should carry on, and the US. So the CIA versus MI6. The UK seems to want to abandon Zelensky and go with Zaluzhny, whereas so it was The Economist, right? Was it The Economist?
The Economist, the British magazine, showed Zelensky in a very, very bad light.
Did a kind of a hit piece on Zelensky.
Yeah, Hitler in the bunker. He's delusional. We're gonna win.
And then the Washington Post kind of is promoting Zelensky, and now with this new story that Zaluzhny was the one that was responsible for the Nord Stream bombing, that really, you know, kind of is attack on him and kind of rules him out as a prospective, the newest dictator of the rump state of Ukraine. So yeah, go ahead.
What's most interesting is that not really. I always get Sullivan said the window for funding Ukraine is closing, right? So US is already dropping them, and now Germany said which is Olaf Scholz's little stupid sinking country, said we're going to double the aid to Ukraine. Even though if this is taken at face value, then Zaluzhny attacked German infrastructure, which would trigger NATO Article 5. Like, how do you fucking square that circle? I just don't know what's going on, mostly in Germany. But yeah, I read that Sona 21, and it does look like a fight in the shadows between intelligence services.
And how plausible is it that this colonel didn't lead? He said he didn't participate in it either, but he helped to plan it allegedly, with these 6 special ops, Ukrainian special ops that dove down 80 feet on this sailboat.
80 meters, yes.
80 meters and blew up the pipeline using, you know, a whole lot of high explosives, and then surfaced apparently without any decompression chamber, which would have killed them all. So the story isn't plausible, and I say that with certainty because I watched Jimmy Dore. When he was at the UN, he was actually addressing the UN Security Council, but the person speaking before him was Dirk Polman or something to that effect, and he really laid out exactly how the Nord Stream bombing happened. He talks about in June during the Balt Ops with 45 different vessels, including 2 small U.S. aircraft carriers that can deploy a mini sub from its hull. That's when the explosives were deployed at 80 meters. It was the deepest part of the very deepest part possible that you could put explosives to blow up the pipeline. There was a lot of other areas you could have blown up that were not as deep. It was done by, and then that was in June, and then in September when it blew up, you know, he's got the Hercules jet that went that exact same route, ostensibly dropping a sonar buoy. And then circling around with its transponder off for 3 hours, and then a tanker plane leaving an airport at exactly the same time the explosion happened to refuel this Hercules. So we have records. This is all open source. This is all. So he laid out, you know, step by step how the actual thing was blown up, and he's got the seismic data. He's got all this airport data of these aircraft leaving, and when their transponder is turned off, picking up the buoy and then going back to it. So he really laid out a very compelling, comprehensive case about how it happened. And we don't get any of that from these fucking liars trying to say it's Ukraine. Like, there's no explanation for how it happened. They're just like, oh, we do it and we know we do it. And then the thing is, certain media just take it as gospel. It's like, oh, now we know. Now the truth comes out.
For a year.
They don't even question that, oh, is this truth, or is it just saving face by the U.S. because they don't want to look like the international terrorists that they are?
Yeah, for a year. It was last September, right? For a year, it was a complete mystery. A year-long investigation revealed nothing.
Well, it was Russia at first, and then, that didn't make much sense.
Yeah, it took time for the 6 guys on the yacht to emerge. I just hope if Cy Hirsch is watching this latest development, he's having the laugh of his life. I hope so.
He'll probably write a rebuttal. I'm sure he'll have a response. And he had a lot of great insights too, but he didn't get into specifics about, when this Hercules turned off its transponder, when this tanker left to refuel it in flight. So, I mean, none of that, we didn't get that from Cy Hirsch, but yeah, no, he does good work, but so I would encourage everybody to watch. It's the the douchebag comedian was Jimmy Dore. It was when Jimmy Dore addressed the United Nations. The presenter right before him really
he's a
laid it out.
jag-off comedian.
The douchebag jag-off comedian. That's right. So how did we get down that rabbit hole? We just started talking about.
I just want to add to that. While that happens, this blame game is going on. The big brother Poland, who was always, the Duda hugged him, they're out. The latest Polish magazine came out with a front cover, which was Ciao Pinocchio, and it was Morawiecki, the previous president with like a long nose, dressed in yellow and blue in the Ukraine colors. So that marriage is just completely over. He's isolated. The American aid is just running out. They said, well, we got a whole, 30 billion in next year's budget, and we're going to go cold, and we need a defense shield for winter. So it's just horrible timing. And apparently in media within Ukraine, different levels of military leaders are having a night of the long knives. I stand with Zaluzhny. He's going to be the next president. The other guy said no such thing. Zelensky and who's the top guy? Yermak will stay in power, and it's begun. They began to eat each other. It's just not looking good there. There's not a lot of time left, I think, in country 404.
And the winter's coming. Ukraine is not going to be a warm place to be this winter.
Oh no. I mean, yeah, the infrastructure bombing has not even yet started, and there's a big push in Avdiivka. I don't want to really get into the battlegrounds. Maybe Ian has some info there, but it just looks like the finale of this series. But in the meantime, one thing I picked up, which was military news, that there was this headline somewhere Patriot Gamble or something like that, where the US has so few air defense systems that there was the Dubai air show going on in recent days. The Russians are they have Rostec jets and prototypes. They have garnered great interest there. It's a big military affair. And the US didn't display their Patriot systems. They pulled it out to send to Middle East allies, I think Saudis and Oman. That's how few they have. And this is from Western news. This isn't, Putinist, Ruski, horrible PR from Pravda. This is them saying, sorry, we just don't have that many left. Europe couldn't do the 1 million thing, the 1 million 155 millimeter shells. They produced maybe 30,000. 300.
300,000, yes.
1,000 of them. And Borrell now said it's just not realistic that we can complete that. Not this year, not anytime soon. It's just so, the undefeatable, wonderful thing. And Yermak, on the other hand, Ukraine is not Yermak, the big head, tiny face guy. Kuleba is saying, what a pathetic industry. He's actually saying pathetic industry, arms industry you have in Europe. That's gratefulness, Ukrainian style. It's amazing. And they still want to get into the South Pacific. Go ahead, Carla.
Now, so what will have to happen for Ukraine to negotiate away that 4 oblasts and possibly more to Russia? I mean, what's going to get them to the table?
Nothing, because Russia is not going to get to the table at this point. They've learned not to trust any agreements with it. But Ian, you're the guy in Moscow. What do you think?
Well, I think the time for Ukraine to negotiate, and everybody was saying this, was in that Istanbul talk in April. Even some knowledgeable Western sources were saying that. You had retired generals coming on and saying that was when Ukraine could stand up and say, we gave Russia a bloody nose, we forced them to backtrack. We didn't lose any territory because at the time, Luhansk and Donetsk were basically as good as lost. Crimea was as good as lost. They could have said, look at this, we stopped an invasion dead in its tracks, didn't lose anything. Zelensky didn't have to step down. They didn't have to lose. That was really Ukraine's moment to be that underdog that stood up against all odds. But Since then, Russia's had that partial mobilization. They've ramped up their military-industrial complex. They have double or triple the boots on the ground, plus tanks, plus artillery, plus everything else. Drone industry. The time for you when Ukraine cannot negotiate in a position of strength anymore. They're in a position of weakness, and now it's too late to negotiate. Russia doesn't need to negotiate. There's just no reason for them to at this point. They can just win. They don't.
Unconditional surrender is the only possibility at this point. I don't know who's going to be willing to make that, but that is the only way out, in my view.
I mean, that's contingent on, the battlefield turning out how it looks like it's going to turn out. But
yes,
I should say that, at the beginning of the special military operation, I wouldn't have guessed that we would be where we are now. Like, I would have guessed that Russia would have been much more successful on the battlefield than they have been. And now there's explanations for that. It's not a war. It's a special military operation. They're not going after, they're not, proceeding with the war like they would if it was an actual war, if they declared war, and they're treating it like a special military operation. So that could explain the lack of, I don't want to say the word success, but I just think the battlefield would look different. I expected it to look different at the very beginning, and where the lines currently are, I think you have to see a big change. I think you have to see a breaking down of the Ukrainian army, like Scott Ritter has talked about for a long time, like a lot of the analysts have talked about for a long time, but that we haven't really seen yet. We haven't really seen a Ukrainian military collapse, and that's what we need to see if there's going to be this kind of surrender. And so when are we going to see that is the question. The analysts, they mean well, and they provide good analysis, but like they've said, like, oh, the summer, and then it was like the fall, and then it was the winter, and then now it's the spring. So,
well, we've all seen old men, pregnant ladies now, also very young people on the front. So that's not looking good. But what the current chase is, just according to economic news, there is the actual economic collapse, which is obviously followed by a military collapse, could come even before anything on the battleground actually changes. There's a bunch of people who left Israel, and a bunch of them were Ukrainian, and this was a headline in the Kyiv Independent. They went back to Kiev because it's more calm. That's what shows you that this is not total war. You're totally right about that. It's still a special military operation. Sorry, something's wrong with Slug. Maybe she's got an upset stomach, but I'm gonna.
Okay, I'm sorry, Slug. I hope you feel better.
Wonder. And if we have an accident, we have an accident.
So we did hit on Israel, and they have. I think the policy of the resistance is like a war of attrition, right? It's this current level of this current military effort by Israel is definitely not sustainable. It's hurting their economy. They're bleeding dollars by the day, and the longer it goes, the more difficult it's going to be. So it's in Israel's best interest to wrap it up, but they also want to do a comprehensive thing where they don't have to deal with this issue in the future. And so that's their goal, their objective. Meanwhile, the resistance is just trying to demonstrate the weakness, show that Israel's an albatross to the West. They engage in these criminal activities, and it's too expensive. It's too expensive for the West to keep bankrolling this criminality. And so they want Israel to be thrown under the bus, just like they want we want Ukraine to be thrown under the bus, and the West needs to just stop, get rid of these albatrosses around its neck. But we don't see that. We want to see that. We don't see it yet. But so Ukraine. Go ahead.
The final and third, let's call it stage or theater of war, would obviously be the South China Sea. But we know that Xi Jinping is heading for San Francisco, which have been tidied up. It looks beautiful now, and none of the homeless and the horror show on the streets there. But the U.S. has been known to speak in a very polite way for just a couple of days and then immediately backstab. So I don't think Xi Jinping really trusts them. But they actually want to do this a third time.
Do you know the date of the meeting, when that's supposed to be?
I think Xi Jinping's on its way. I think it's like the next couple of days. like really, really soon now.
So, I mean, and that's a big deal. And I mean, I am so curious to see how that plays out, because the MO is they say nice things. The minute he's gone, they trash it all, and they disparage any kind of goodwill that such a meeting can achieve. But yeah, the question is, what is the U.S. going to add? What does the U.S. want with China? Like, the U.S. wants to contain China. How are they going to further their strategy to contain China, which just means destabilize, weaken, and make their economy obviously not as good. So how does the U.S. further that objective by having Xi meet in San Francisco? I'm not sure, but definitely they could just do their typical thing where they shake his hand and then spit in his face the minute he leaves.
First, they're going to ask him to please buy trillions of US debt, because nobody else is, and they're
yeah, and I mean, they're going to ask him for help to stabilize the global economy, and that's something China would be willing to do. But I think China's already learned a lesson about what that gets them, and so that they're not dumb. So I trust China to respond correctly to whatever is on the table. But I'm just so curious to see how that all plays out. The Philippines and India, these are real interesting topics. I have a lot to say, but I don't want to monopolize the roundtable here.
Yeah, me neither, and I also don't want to go on too long. But MK Badra Kumar, who does Indian Punchline, he wrote a very detailed article that India is now like lockstep with the US's efforts to contain China. It's part of the BRICS, but it's a very weak member, and like it's becoming a land base basically for the US armed forces, and it's very, very disappointing to me. I'd read that article first. It's one perspective, but it's a strong one. He's a seasoned diplomat.
If nobody else is gonna jump in, I'm gonna get on my soapbox. Carlo, I'm
Go ahead.
No, just go ahead.
I want soapbox, Billy Bob.
The traditional animus is at play here, but go ahead.
You mean between India,
between China and India? Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems it's been obvious to me for several years that India is going to play a central role in the complete economic severing of ties between U.S. and China. So ultimately, we're going to want to decouple all of our industries, all of our corporations from China, and we want to move them to India. So India is going to play that same role. So like the U.S. was very, very much responsible. I wouldn't say totally responsible, but they definitely helped in developing China and bringing such prosperity. Now, obviously, the Chinese Communist Party was invaluable as well. But the Chinese Communist Party could not have achieved what they did in China without this trillions and trillions and trillions of direct foreign investment. So China was smart by enticing that foreign investment, by making a market economy that foreigners wanted to come and invest in because it was so lucrative. But without that investment, China wouldn't. So the West is like, you know what? We did it for China. We can do it for India. We're going to take all of our stuff out of China. We're going to move it to India. And then we're going to, in that way, we're going to, destroy and contain this threat to our, global hegemony, which is China. So when I saw Sunak as the new prime minister in the UK, that just kind of, confirmed my suspicion. And he's going to help facilitate this transition. His dad is one of the richest Indian billionaires.
And let's not forget both Kamala and Vivek. This isn't just the UK.
Well, she's got some Indian descent, and yeah, Vivek. That's interesting. I mean, I wonder if he's going to win any kind of office. He must. Like, he's being promoted big time, so I'm sure they've got big plans for him. But yeah, so this decoupling of wealth, and we're gonna do to India what we did to China, and we're gonna cut China's. That's the hope. That's the plan. And then also the South China Sea. So it's unfortunate that, Marcos Jr. is just going all in with the U.S. I didn't really see that from India, but I take I can't pronounce that guy's name, Ben.
Badra Kumar.
Yeah. So I take him at his word that there's been a big shift in Indian policy against China towards the U.S. But during the SMO, I didn't see that, right? So India was being very neutral, not going all in with the West, and that was comforting. I was surprised, but I'm not surprised to hear this news from Bhadra Kumar that India has taken this anti-China stance. It's unfortunate, but it's the strategy that I've seen at play for several years now.
Yeah. I was afraid of this, and I think you guys all know that the India-Russia relation is nowhere near the same as the India-China relation. They're very different relationships.
So I don't want to disparage 1.4 billion people, but India just had a tunnel collapse.
And a dam collapse in 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that that's a bogus move. I don't think the Indian culture can accomplish what Confucian culture accomplished in China.
Without a communist party.
I don't want to put it in those terms, but they need 50 years of development. Because it's not a cultural thing, it's a developmental thing, and they need 50 years of really serious work and development to get where China is. And the US thinks that it just sets up a factory there and it will be the same as if it sets up in China. To me, that smells very, very bad news down the road, maybe not even far.
Yeah, no, I mean, Indians are very, I mean, you can look at Indian communities like in the USA, for example. You see very tight-knit, hardworking communities. So, I wouldn't sit there and say, the Chinese are harder working than Indians. Is definitely just not a true statement. But, like you said, it's decades of development when you're looking. And also culture, when you have rural people without indoor plumbing, without electricity, it does take some work to get them accommodated to an urban lifestyle as opposed to what they're used to in a village. So it's going to be a lot of work. So this idea that we're just going to pivot from China to India, I don't think is going to work out as well as they think.
Well,
yeah, I mean to quote, just a quick quote from Pepe Escobar, one of my favorite geopolitical analysts. He said that Modi is surrounded. His political power is a bunch of nouveau riches, like they made their fortunes in the last 10 years, basically on these little crony American style, financialized wealth. And a whole bunch of Hindutva madmen, who have visceral hatred of Arabs and Chinese. That's who he's talking to. He's not surrounded, and he doesn't have the approval of most of the working people in the it can't be compared to the 95 million Chinese Communist Party, who is supported beyond 90% at home, every level. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say, look, in India, I know it's on the wane, but the caste system is still alive and well.
Unfortunately,
in China, with the culmination of the Communist Party in power, there is no caste system. Everybody is at least theoretically equal and treated as equals, and that's how people have been lifted out of poverty. Now. There's a long tradition of this kind of stability in all kinds. The Chinese during the right after the Warring States period, the Han Dynasty, they stabilized all kinds of the weights and measures became homogeneous,
standardized
through the standardized. Even the width of the axles on wagons was standardized to improve the roads. So they have a long tradition of that. It goes back to the Confucian exams that people had to take to get into positions of power, and those were not only examinations of knowledge of practical measures, but they were examinations that tested people's moral fiber all along the way. They had a moral context, and so there's a kind of binding in Chinese culture that is not there in Indian culture. And
that's a good point.
That's going to lead to problems that these investors had not anticipated or maybe have. I don't know.
I would always follow my analysis of that's what the strategy is by saying it's going to fail.
Like, I'm with you, Billy Bob. But if we're talking these anecdotes, everybody knows that. Well, the century humiliation is one thing, but even during the 90s, when it became like first a knockoff factory and then a factory of everything else, if you had relatives or someone go to China, they said people are dirty, unruly. It wasn't a sanitary, beautiful place that it is today. And what, like in recent days on Telegram, it went viral, and X, social media, it came from Chinese social media. This guy stops with a little scooter bike, goes into the store where there's no attendant. He grabs a bottle of water, pays with his phone on the attendant-free little terminal or something, and leaves without the water. So the attendant finds this video. He sends it up saying, hey, this guy, everybody find this guy. I have to give him his water. Now, imagine that couldn't happen during the century of humiliation. It can't happen in Hungary, and it absolutely can't happen in India. But, they came from that point when everybody would just pick that store dry, even in China, to this point. And that journey, it can absolutely happen in India. I just don't see it happening. I don't think there's a cultural something holding back India. There's a technical we like to use that the level of development, that is what needs to be raised, and the level of abundance to get to that point. I don't think it has to do that much with ancient cultures, because
I think
China was a mess as well.
It's the class nature of the government, right? So the government in China is sincerely dedicated to identifying and furthering the interests of the vast majority, whereas that's not true in India, and that's not true in the West. Like, they are a government of, by, and for the wealthy elites that have interests. And so they're trying to identify the interests of the wealthy elites, the global wealthy elites, and then, doing things to further those interests, such as weakening China. But, that's, it's not good. That kind of an approach is not going to produce the results that China has produced, because China has produced results that have benefited 1.4 billion people, 800 billion lifted out of poverty. They don't want to do that in India. Modi doesn't care about lifting people out of poverty. He cares about him and his friends getting even more wealthy and staying in power. But and that's just like the West. The West is the same way. They don't care about the working class.
The saddest thing is, at one point in history, they both had a struggle of independence from Western domination. One was Mao, the other was basically 100 years of rebellion against the British. And they ended up in such a different place today, even with basically the same amount of people today. It's a very interesting.
So when you do comparisons, I mean, the closest thing you can compare to China is India, because they both had their independence around the same time. They both had relatively same landmass, relatively same population numbers, and China has just surpassed them and lapped them over and over and over again by like a factor of 10. And it's why, I mean, it's because they use communism and Marxism to, as a tool to improve the lives of everyone, So I don't know. It's that's an inadequate explanation, but I don't want to get too deep into political theory. So the thing is with the Philippines, that's going to be a problem, right? So China has identified the South China Sea as its lifeline, and it was more of a lifeline for it in the past than it is today, because today they have actual energy
infrastructure, like land-based, connected to Russia.
Yeah. Connected to Russia, and of course they're Russia is looking for people to sell it to, so it's a a thing made in heaven, whatever that's called. Whatever. So they're not as dependent on the South China Sea for their economic lifeline and their energy needs as they used to be, but it's still a very, very important place. And China, of course, has read Western policy papers that identify the South China Sea as the place that they're going to use to attack China and to weaken them economically and to cut them off from Mideastern oil and other energy and and just trade and commerce, which is what China depends on. So China has done their best to address that threat by the West by, developing these atolls, turning these, putting in some defensive structures to keep, the U.S. Navy from having the ability to roll in there with impunity and just embargoing and blockading and cutting off their economy. So this is non-negotiable to China. China's not just going to say, okay, you know what, you can have, you can go ahead and have this stranglehold over us that whenever you choose to tighten it, we'll just die. That's fine. No. And very similar to this, in my opinion, is, in Finland with the Winter War, right? So Stalin told the Finns, hey, this is not a, this is a threat. This is an existential threat to our existence. So here, let's do this trade. We're just not going to allow. I'll give you more land. You give us this real strategic land, and we'll give you in return even more land over here. And the Finns said no. And Saul said, I'm not asking. I mean, this is our life and death, right? We're not just going to expose ourselves. And so they went to war. Ultimately, Russia was able to get that strategic land that they needed. And in return, Finland got it. So the agreement that they agreed before the war actually happened after the war, but they had to go to war because the Finns were being intransigent and didn't want to give. Anyway, same kind of thing. Like these things are non-negotiable. They're the safety and lifeline of the nation, and it would be irresponsible of any Chinese government to say, you know what, we'll just go ahead and hand this kill switch to the West and hope they don't use it. No, you're gonna defend yourself. You're gonna take all responsible measures you can to protect your vulnerable flank. And so that's what they're doing. And the U.S., of course, wants to escalate in that area. They want to, force the issue. They want to, under the guise of championing the rights of the Philippines, they want to, turn that into a tinderbox that can, that can lead to a war. So it's, what did the Chinese diplomats say? That the Philippines just aren't thinking long term. Like they don't know. They really want to sign up to be the next Ukraine. Like that's not going to go well for them.
Yeah, that was Global Times. They don't know the consequences. That was said straight out. Yeah.
So what needs to happen? What the U.S. ought to be doing, if it was a rational, benevolent force in the world, would be to suggest, hey, let's negotiate. You guys need to negotiate a settlement. And then China's negotiated terms with some of those countries, but the U.S. is going to these countries saying, no, do not negotiate an understanding with China. Dictate to them what it's going to be, and just don't come to the negotiating table. And the China's like, hey, it's none of the U.S. business. The Philippines and us need to discuss on how we're gonna, figure this out. But unfortunately, with the last election, Marcos Jr. does, he's just all in with the U.S. So that's not good. That's a problem.
The pattern is, and we all have to wait and see where it goes, that alliances, friendships, they're being tested. India has gone one way, also the Philippines. But remember that China has now basically agreed on a second military base. One is in Djibouti. That's the Strait Armanda between the Arab island and Africa.
Yeah, it's right next to a U.S. military base.
Yeah, and there's a second one now being built right across Oman, which would be the Strait of Hormuz, the two energy highways, water-based highways of the world. And Russia is basically expanding the same thing in Libya, which is just south from from Europe, from Italy, from Greece. That's where Libya is. These things couldn't have happened before the SMO or 3 years ago. So there's not just a one-sided like US can do whatever it wants and find some proxies, but the other side is responding, and we will have to just wait and see where it goes, But the time window, it's almost closed, I think, to stop China's rise. And a lot of not RUSI because that's the English one, but some of these think tanks, these defense think tanks in the US have been sounding this alarm for 10 years. Like we're running out of time.
Yeah. No, I think they did run out of time.
Still, the irony is you have to consider the Chinese base in Djibouti.
The only
US, the U.S. Rents space and shipping rights of military nature from the Chinese from that base and port in Djibouti.
Strange bedfellows.
Yeah, it's just strange. It's so yeah. I mean, I can't come up with I can't parse that really. So I mean,
Yeah, it's not two-dimensional.
Well,
We're all just trying to
Yeah.
understand.
Well, I mean,
it
it's a good sign. I mean, as long as they can maintain some kind of relations, it's gonna forestall
that's
the
good.
economic aggression, which will then turn into military aggression. But so I'm happy that they still have these agreements, and I'm happy she is coming to San Francisco. I'm really curious to see how that is going to further the West's intent to decouple from China, to contain China, to destabilize China, to weaken China, to destroy China, because right now that seems to be the West's agenda, the U.S. agenda.
It's without peer the most important event coming up. That's probably where I'm going to pay most attention to. Yeah.
Now, I did want to discuss quickly the meeting of the Arab states. I guess 11 of them all agreed on certain things, and it was 4 intransigent Arab states. They didn't name them, but you could figure out who it was. So it was Egypt, it was Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and I think the UAE that refused to go along with all the bullet points.
Steps. Yes.
Yeah, and mind you, 2 of those are going to be BRICS countries from the 1st of January, which is less than a month and like a month and a half. That's an interesting.
I mean, that brings us around to the fact that these governments, that mainly the ones you just listed off, are all friendly to the U.S. I believe actually all of them have some U.S. military presence, military contracts, and are also on the lowdown friendly with Israel. So of course they can't really openly oppose Israel, but their populations might feel otherwise. So it's not astonishing.
They all seem to be on that saddle, in that saddle, that the alliances they had, the little agreements they had, they're becoming untenable based on the population's absolute rage. I mean, Macron has all the, I think 6 of them, but I don't know how many ambassadors he has in the Middle East. Like they sent an official complaint up to him that this is untenable what you're doing. You are whitewashing war crimes. We can't. The relationship that we have with Middle Eastern Arab countries is becoming untenable because of you. That again, from the base level, it goes up to diplomacy. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, no, your summary going into this this episode this morning had a great expose of Macron's changing position on that. And so he went from saying that
the dance, hey, Macarona, the Macarona dance, like he's on one side and then 4 days later he's on the other, and he's been playing it since the 7th of October. It's amazing.
Spineless and unprincipled comes to mind, but again, not as bad as the West, who's just all in for genocide. At least he was doing the genocide dance. But I'm against it. I'm for it. I'm against it. Whereas all the rest of the West is just, I'm for it.
There was one lady, I know the Prime Minister of Australia is called Anthony Albanese, but there's another lady who I forgot was also an Albanese, no relation, special rapporteur, I think, UN something. And she had a speech with BBC and Guardian journalists, and she wrecked them. And a lot of the Australian politics, like handles on social media, saying, "Throw out Anthony, we want this chick." She was absolutely amazing. I'm gonna try to find her name. Just people want to read up or watch up on her. It's amazing.
So those were the 3 main fronts as we wait for Ben's name. I thought we covered them pretty good. Any other?
Francesca, that's it. Francesca Albanese, fantastic.
No, I need to let the dog out soon, though. Okay, he's getting on my nerves. He's getting impatient with me.
Yeah.
What was the relevance of her again, Ben?
Francesca Albanese was in like an Australian news night. It's like the White House dinner or something, where people get to do Q&A, and a lot of these stupid, clueless Western what do you call them, journalists ask her absolutely stupid questions, and she eviscerated her. It was wonderful to watch. eviscerated them. Sorry.
And she's Australian.
Yeah, she is. No relation to Anthony Albanese, but she was great. Francesca.
Okay, so
Albanese.
and we can find that
hello.
on YouTube or something.
Yeah, social media, YouTube. Okay. I think I watched it on X.
I had not seen that. That escaped my.
I didn't send it through. Sorry.
All right, you guys are having dog problems.
I think
Carlo,
we already had an accident. I need to clean that up.
Yeah. No, I should go.
Okay. next Friday we got Aaron Good. He's a great historian. He's done a lot of recent work with these authors about Kennedy. So I wanted to talk to him about the Kennedy assassination and tie that into current events. Ian, you're going to be joining us then. You promised already. So that's thank you for that. I hope Carlo's health permits him to join us if we don't have to send him on assignment somewhere. And Ben, you're going to be joining us this Friday as well, right?
Yep, I have work to get back to, but I'll definitely be here. And Aaron Good wrote American Exception, the book. I think that's also his handle, American Exception. And he is that book is brilliant.
He's tremendous. So we look forward to that. Thank you, everybody, for watching. See you on Friday.
See you then.